we have joining us today Dr. Manikandan. There he is. Good evening, Doctor.
Hi. Good evening.
Good evening. I was just giving them a quick brief about why we are doing this series. And I've told them that it's important because we all have information at our fingertips and we tend to go and look on Google. We don't know how much of it is correct, how much is validated. Sometimes, and one of the questions that came is, any illness they say is cancer, so we get worried. So we said it would be a good idea to look at someone who knows about this and ask questions. I've also collated some questions which some of our people, both on Instagram and Facebook, want to ask you. But before that, Dr. Manikandan, please, would you be able to share what you think people should know about cancer and what message you want to give them about cancer?
Yeah, sure. Good evening to all of you who are listening. Good evening, Sanu Hassan. Actually, I'm a surgical oncologist, and today we're talking about cancer. So, just to start off with, what is cancer? I mean, that is a question some of you have. What is cancer? Cancer is basically an abnormal growth of cells within a particular part of the body. What happens is the cells grow and multiply so fast that they develop into a mass of, a small mass of cells, which then grows. And at some point, it ruptures into the blood vessels, and then it spreads across to the other parts of the body. So it is a cell. It is basically happens because the limiting mechanism of cellular growth in the body is lost. Normally, our body works to a blueprint. One cell divides into two, it keeps dividing for some time, and then when a particular finite period of division is over, the cell dies off. That is how we are able to be normal, and at some point, our development stops. But for cancer cells, they lack that check post, something which stops them from developing. So they just go on developing, and it's because of a genetic defect that happens. Now, why does it happen? Another very common question. Why did it happen to me? I did not smoke. I did not chew tobacco. I did not do this. I did not do that. But then now I'm having cancer. How is it possible? There is no specific reason to say that this is the cause of your cancer. Usually, it is a combination of many factors. There may be genetic factors because of the environment we live in, of the pollution that we are facing, the food that we're eating. Familiar inheritances that we may have, and of course other iatrogenic factors like smoking, tobacco, alcohol, obesity, which is again lifestyle changes are major cause for the rise in cancer in our country now. Obesity has become a very big factor. Initially, we had a different profile of cancer compared to Western countries. The US had a different profile. Like their stomach cancers used to be more in the upper stomach, while we had more in the lower stomach because we were more related to pollution and infection, H. pylori bacterial infection. Now that is changing. Now our stomach cancers are also going more in the upper part of the stomach, where we are also becoming developed, and we are also eating a lot of junk food, becoming obese, not doing exercise. So there's a lot of factors which cause cancer, which may play a role. Yeah. So there is no specific cause. It's all a risk factor. But there are some things which we can say. Smoking. If you smoke, there is a very good chance that you will develop lung cancer. But then there are also some lucky smokers who don't develop lung cancer.
Yeah.
Out of 100 smokers, maybe 80 of them get it and 20 don't get it. While out of 100 non-smokers, maybe 20 get it and 80 don't get it. But as I said, it is all a risk factor. That this increases your risk of getting cancer.
In fact, someone once told me, I don't know how accurate this is, but someone once told me, if you live long enough, cancer will get you. Is this a true fact?
Well, yeah. I mean, the nature needs some way of killing you. At some point, it cannot allow you to grow like a cancer. It has to stop you at some point. So, age is a factor because as we grow older, we are living for a longer time. Our average lifespan has increased, and as the cells in our body for the past 50, 60, 70 years, they go on dividing, it is very likely that they will pick up some abnormality, some mutation along the way, which will cause cancer. That's how it started actually. Cancer was mainly a disease of old age, but now due to a lot of other factors, younger people are also getting cancer.
Yeah, so I think that nicely segues into some of the questions that we have. We have somebody called Anita Shakti who has said, how do you identify early sign of cancer? Because we are so afraid of that word cancer, we've been hearing it for so long, we end up Googling it, and Google doctor says any symptom is a cancer symptom. So how do we identify?
See, the problem with cancer is that it is not easy to pick it up at an early stage by seeing a symptom. Cancer is usually picked up at an early stage only by screening, not by symptoms. That is a problem that we have because cancer doesn't cause pain upfront. Like if you have a pustule in your tongue, or if you have an oral ulcer, a normal oral ulcer in your tongue, it will pain. It will really pain, forcing you to seek some medication. But if you have a malignant ulcer on your tongue, it will not pain. So we put it off. It will not pain till it has become big enough to go into some nerve or into the bone, or to cause major problems. So that way, that is one of the problems. Similarly, if you see cancers within the abdomen, like within the abdomen, I mean like stomach, intestine, liver, and so on. Usually, it doesn't cause a problem till it is big enough to block some pathway where you are not able to pass stools, or you have jaundice or something. So that is a problem with cancers as such. They are not symptomatic in the early stages. So it is only unless it is in the oral cavity where you can just look in the mirror and you can spot some abnormality which you can go and seek help.
Yeah.
Anything growing inside you will not show up till it is fairly big. Or if it is picked up incidentally while doing some sort of screening or a health checkup or whatever that is. So it is difficult to say that this is a symptom, and moreover, symptom varies from site to site. An oral cancer will have a different symptom from a GI cancer.
Right.
If you can say in our country, maybe I can talk about what are the commonest cancers, the top three or top two common cancers in this country. In men, it is oral cancer is the number one cancer in men, followed by lung and stomach cancers. By stomach, I mean the pouch of the organ which receives the food directly when you're eating, which then mixes it with the acid and then pushes it into the intestine. So, in case of oral cancers, the symptom would usually be some sort of, it will start off with a discoloration. There may be a white patch or a red patch, and then it will come into a frank ulcer. You can feel it as a malignant ulcer when the edges of that ulcer are raised above the normal mucosa.
I see.
Or if you feel it hard, usually it will not be painful.
Right.
Cancerous ulcers are not, unless, as I said, they are very advanced. And lung, you see patients having cough which doesn't subside over a period of time. They've taken some medication, it's been like 3-4 weeks and it's not subsiding, or they have sputum and they're coughing out blood. That sort of thing should be checked.
Definitely.
And in women, breast cancer, most common cancer, followed by cervical cancer.
And these breast two cancer, screening, as you're saying this, someone is asking screening. So if you could also include how often women should screen and at what age?
That actually depends on the site. For breast cancers, usually screening is advised from around 40 to 50 years. You can start off. At least once in 2 years, you can get a mammogram. And once a year, you can get a clinical breast examination. You can consult your gynecologist or whomever you're comfortable with and get a breast examination done. And in case of cervical cancer, you can start early. Some 25 to 30 years, they do pap smears. Yeah. Once in 3 years, you can do the pap smear, and that should be adequate. Actually, screening is not available for all cancers. Screening is available for breast cancer, cervical cancer. To some extent, you have it for prostate cancer, lung cancer, but it is not commonly done. And the marker that we use for prostate is not extremely sensitive. It can be raised in a lot of other conditions, other than not specific. It can be raised in a lot of non-malignant conditions also. But established screening we have for breast and cervical cancers. I think that is something women should go for.
Yeah. So you're saying that for men, it's oral cancer, lung cancer, and gastrointestinal cancer. In some cases, prostate, in some stomach cancer, and in some cases, prostate. And for women, it's breast cancer and cervical cancer. Are they the most common?
Cervical cancer. most common, and then you have other gynec cancers like ovarian cancer, and
Ah,
so this is the most common. Actually, breast cancer is so common that even if you take the data of all both men and women, it will still be the cancer with the highest number of incidences annually.
right.
Previously, it was cervical cancer, which was more common in women. As I said, our profile is also changing. In the past, when we were more of a tropical country with a lot of infection and viruses going around, cervical cancer was more common in our country than breast cancer. But
Right.
now it has declined because hygiene has improved, menstrual hygiene has improved, and the women are more aware about the infection and everything. So the incidence of cervical cancer has come down, but breast cancer is rising.
Right.
Lifestyle changes, I think, is the main contributing factor for breast cancer.
Right.
Moreover, a lot of them are coming up for evaluation, and more are being picked up also. Because of
It's
the
also
awareness
possible that earlier we weren't, aware of it. We weren't going in for the screening and checkup, but now that we are aware, it's like almost like that vitamin D deficiency that we all seem to have discovered, isn't it? Earlier we never knew about it. Now suddenly all of us know about it.
Suddenly all of us are deficient.
Yeah,
True.
yeah. Then, you were saying that there isn't really a direct link between what you can do to prevent cancer and the change in lifestyle, etc. But is there
No,
some
I wouldn't say
things
there is
that
a
we can
direct
remember?
link. I think that is. I'm sorry. Sorry.
No, is there something that we should keep in mind?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I won't say that there is nothing that you can do to prevent cancer. Of course, you can do a lot of things. You can eat healthy. You can reduce processed food, junk food, red meat. You can take in more of millet, and if possible, more of organic food which has less pesticides. And you have to do more exercises. Lifestyle changes basically are the biggest contributing factor to reducing your risk of cancer. You eat healthy, you do exercise, you avoid addictions like smoking, tobacco, and all of them contribute.
And it won't even stop, and it won't help prevent just cancer. It'll prevent a whole host of diseases, isn't it?
Not a disease, a whole
Yeah.
host of diseases. Exactly.
Yeah. Then we have Jayashankar Jayaraman asking, is it true that nowadays when someone is identified with a disease, more often than not, it leads to cancer, a diagnosis of cancer? Is this something that we are misunderstanding? Because there was a similar question here. When we go to a doctor, every time it is cancer. Why is it that people have this idea?
No, I don't think it's a diagnosis is being made up. Actually, if you go with a lump or if you go with something which is suspicious of cancer, then yeah, the chances of cancer are high. But that being said, in case of breast lumps, especially in younger women, if you go and get it evaluated, you will find that almost 80 to 90% of breast lumps are benign. They are non-malignant because most of the lumps that women develop in their breasts are non-malignant. There is a small portion, especially in older women, which is more likely to be malignant. But in younger women, it is more likely to be benign than malignant.
And if we do find, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Sorry, you said it's not mandatory that if something is
it's
there.
not mandatory that has to be cancer, but a lump, of course, a suspicious thing, there is a very good chance that it might be malignant. Better to get it checked out. Better to be safe rather than sorry.
True. And if they say that this is a benign lump, then we can just ignore it, or does it mean there is a warning sign and I need to now be alert for the next lump that appears?
No, not necessary. Like, see, in case of, again, we'll come back to talking about a breast lump. Like, there are lumps like fibroadenomas, which are benign and unlikely to go into, form a malignancy later on. Usually, 1 centimeter or 2 centimeter size lump can be avoided. We can just leave it. We can ignore it. No need to go in for any procedure. But if it is fairly big, 3-4 centimeters, and if it is troubling you, so that's a psychological impact also. You feel it every day and you feel like, okay, is it going to become malignant? Better to get that kind of lumps removed.
Right.
Even if it is benign, you get it removed, but you don't have to worry that, just because I had a benign lump removed, it's going to be that I'm going to get a malignant lump later on.
Right. Then there is a lady with a really sad story. She says that she lost her uncle to throat cancer. And again, like you said, a non-smoker. So he probably falls into that percentage which had a higher risk factor. But she says, would a blood test have shown that there was throat cancer? Is there a blood test for throat cancer?
No. Actually, there is, as I said, screening is not, we don't have efficient tools for screening for malignancies other than for breast and cervical cancers.
Yeah.
Problem is that the reason is not because research is not going into it. A lot of research is going into it. Problem is that cancer is not something which will show itself upfront. It is something that will only show itself after it has grown to some extent, where it cannot remain hidden anymore.
Right.
That is a problem with the disease biology. Nowadays, especially abroad, they have come up with genetic based test to identify if there is a possibility of us having cancer. But that is still a while away, I think, before it comes into mass acceptance, because the costs are high and accuracy is also not as we would want it to be. It has to be more accurate. And in her uncle's case, I think there's no blood test which can pick up throat cancer. Throat cancer is something which you can only see. You can maybe, if you had an ENT evaluation prior to that, maybe they would have picked it up. But other than that, a blood test, unfortunately, we still don't have something like that.
No, because when we were collating the questions for this topic, someone was saying that she was undergoing treatment for breast cancer. And I said, yeah, I know, I hope you're doing well. And I said, I'm a high risk for cancer because genetically, on my mother's side, there are 10 siblings. Every one of them has had cancer. So, yeah. So that's what I said, so therefore, instead of being afraid of the word cancer, I have to be alert because you hit it early and you hit it hard. Is this approach a correct approach, do you think?
Yeah, sure. Let's see, if you have a strong family history, as you say, of cancer, it is also important to know what kinds of cancer were there in the family members. Because usually the inherited cancer syndromes have a particular pattern. Like the most famous of the syndromes is BRCA, BRCA syndrome, where you have breast and ovary cancers being passed through the family.
Mm-hmm.
But in BRCA2, you can, besides the breast ovary, you can have male breast cancer, you can have prostate, you can have pancreatic cancer also. This will together, if these cancers are running in the family, then you should get yourself checked for a BRCA mutation. That is easily available, not very expensive. You can do it. But if it is like random cancers, like some uncle has had a lung cancer, someone has had a prostate cancer, someone has had a lymphoma, then that doesn't correlate.
That doesn't correlate. I see. Okay, because I didn't know that.
It has to come. Yeah, it has to be like
the same kind of cancer.
Yeah. Lung cancer usually is not inherited. Similarly, prostate cancer is also not inherited. So if you have like this combination of tumors running in the then it is unlikely to be inherited. But as I said, if you have female members with breast cancers, or you have ovarian cancer and breast cancer, or if you have pancreatic cancer or colon cancers and brain tumors, then that kind of matches, and then you have to check. So that if that is the case, if you have a suspicion, you can go to your oncologist. They can assess your family history. They can give you genetic counseling. They can advise you on what mutational analysis you can take before, to identify if you are at risk of, whoever is asking the question is at risk of getting cancer.
Right.
And then you can accordingly do the test and take preventive measures. There are still some preventive measures that you can do. Mostly it revolves around more radical surveillance. As I said, it's still difficult to prevent something from happening. Like even if BRCA mutation is positive, which is known to cause breast cancer, the options that a woman has is either to go in for extensive surveillance starting from the age 25. You go for regular, not just mammogram, you do an MRI of the breast.
MRI.
Per year you do an MRI of the breast, and that sort of thing is more effective. Or the other option is to have the breast removed prophylactically, like
mastectomy.
Yeah. Before. But that is not an option that everyone would like to go for. Put yourself under the knife without any indication, just to prevent it.
Yeah.
So what we can do with these patients, if you have identified the mutation, then we can go and we can every year we can get them checked. If it is colon, they're going to likely get, we can do colonoscopy. If it is going to be breast, we can do MRI breast every year, and you can get yourself examined clinically by a specialist every year.
Right.
And these are the things that we can actually
do. Right. And then Bhuvana Bharat Kumar has a question. Do women with I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this right, fibrocystic breast, do these women have a higher risk for breast cancer?
No.
So is fibrocystic breast, is it just a lot of lumps and in the structure?
Actually, there is for women, there is a period of breast development, and then there is a stable period, and then there is a period of involution where the breast slowly atrophies, reduces in size. So this happens with hormonal changes, especially during the reproductive time that they have, from 25 to 45, that age. There is a lot of, with every cycle, the hormone levels in the body keep changing, and the breast develops, then involutes, leaving behind small lumps, which commonly present as a nodularity. There's a vague nodularity in the breast, and there may be some pain. That is fibrocystic disease. That is unlikely to go further progress into a malignancy.
Right.
It will not be because of that. You need not worry about that.
Okay. This is someone who's talking about someone very close. What is the prognosis of bone marrow transplant surgery post 3 surgeries due to germ cell cancer within a year? I'm not sure I understand any of these terms. So if you could please explain.
Actually, bone marrow transplant is that basically you're replacing the marrow. Germ cell tumor is it any, they have not mentioned about the sex, male, female?
No. It's a male, I think.
Germ cell tumor is something which develops in the reproductive organs, and that can happen in the testes, or it can even happen in the chest, inside the chest, where the initial things, the initiation of the development is there in embryo stage. So germ cell tumors, usually if they are metastatic, if they are not operable, they have to give chemotherapy.
Right.
So if you're giving high dose chemotherapy, what happens is, one of the side effects is that the bone marrow gets knocked. The bone marrow is suppressed. Chemotherapy is a blunt instrument. It's like what the Americans call a bomb.
Yeah.
You just throw it and you hope that it kills off everything.
It's not targeted.
But unfortunately, it kills along with the cancerous cells. It also attacks the normal cells which are developing. It only knows to attack cells which are developing quickly. Like our hair, the hair, which we lose hair, we grow hair. The cycle is fast. Bone marrow, again, every day lakhs of cells are crushed and lakhs of cells are formed. Similarly, our stomach lining, as we eat, it gets damaged. We shed cells and then we grow back cells. So wherever the turnover of cells is high, chemo will attack that. So along with the tumor, you'll also get hair loss. You will get diarrhea. You will get immune suppression. You will get low hemoglobin, anemia. All sorts of things will happen. So when you give high dose chemo for germ cell, definitely bone marrow is likely to be suppressed.
Yeah.
So bone marrow transplant is done along with the treatment, which will help us give high dose chemo. Like you give high dose, and then to cover the side effect, you do bone marrow transplant. Asking what is the prognosis, since they are planning chemo with bone marrow transplant, I'm assuming that it is a more advanced disease. So prognosis has to be guarded. I will not say that it is all is lost, but there is still this option. As long as there are options for treatment, nothing is lost.
Yes.
We can, but at some stage when the disease is advanced, our aim of treatment turns from curative to palliative. But palliative as a word is very misunderstood in our country. Palliative is something people think is like all hope is lost and it is finished. But that is not palliative. Palliative is supporting a person to have a normal quality of life for as long as they're around. So that is palliative. So as long as they're there, we try to prolong their life and give them a good quality of life.
Yeah.
So that, I think the prognosis will be okay. You can still, you have a treatment. That's better than having no treatment at all.
True.
So I think
In fact, one of the persons had said, we don't talk about palliative care. So can you talk about palliative care as well? Because, like you said, I thought palliative care is end of life. But it's not end of life, is it?
Definitely not end of life. Palliative care is basically supporting the patient in such a way that they can have a normal quality. Everybody has a right to dignity of life. When they're going treatment, they go through a lot of suffering. They are recovering from that, and it is mental also as well as physical. So any sort of support which we give them, even for an early stage to a patient, when you are treating, they will have some problems. As I said, in chemo, they might have, despite much, a lot of advances have come right now where chemo is not so painful as it was before. We are able to give drugs to boost immunity. We are able to give drugs to prevent fatigue and diarrhea. Except for hair loss, I think we have covered almost all the other side effects we are able to avoid. But still, some patients need some sort of support. So palliative care can be given at any stage. Even for early stage, you can give palliative.
Right.
It is basically, as I said, to allow them to maintain a good quality of life. That is what palliative care is. A lot of good work is being done in this field. It also involves end stage, end of life also. That is, end of life is just one spectrum of palliative care. It is not the entirety of palliative.
Right.
So you can do many things in palliative.
Okay. I think we've got all the questions here, but we've got some questions here. I'll just scroll up and look at it. Can GERD lead to cancer? Asks Aish Balas. What is GERD? Is it a acid reflux?
Yeah, it's acid reflux. Gastroesophageal reflux disease. That's what GERD stands for. Basically, the tube connecting the mouth to the stomach is the esophagus. And if it has to have a valve which holds the acid in the stomach down. When the valve is loose, the acid comes up. Now, this happens due to many things. You have tea, excessive tea, coffee, excessive weight gain. All this causes the valve to loosen up, and acid may come up. So the esophagus lining is not built to tolerate acid. So what happens is it ulcerates. You have some redness. You have some burning sensation, heartburn, as people say.
Yes.
Acid is rising. You have heartburn. Over a period of time, it is likely to cause. It will change. It will take years, but it will change. The GERD will start off, and then the changes will progress. And at some point down the line, there is a risk that you may develop a malignancy. As I said, it is not 100%, but there is a very high risk of getting a malignancy.
Right. Let me just see. Someone called Tamil Jean wants to know, can any medication cause cancer as side effect?
Medication causing cancer as side effect? I don't really think so. There is no medication that we would give which was going to cause them cancer down the line. Unless there is some adulteration in the whatever is the
process of manufacture.
The normal course of events, I don't think there's any drug which is going to cause cancer. But yeah, sometimes what happens is some drugs have side effects which have come long time down the line. Like in the early 1900s, there was this drug called thalidomide, which was commonly given. And then later on, it was found that it causes birth defects in children. Pregnant women who took thalidomide gave birth to babies with hypoplastic limbs. Hypoplastic means limbs are not there, the arms are not there, that sort of problems. And then they realized that the drug was causing the problem. Then they stopped it. But now it is making a comeback for other treatments. But now you know that you're not supposed to give it to pregnant women.
Right.
So unwittingly, there may be something which may happen later on, where we don't assess the full this thing where the drug is launched without full evaluation. Maybe it happens later on. But as of now, there is nothing which is going to cause cancer.
And there is one cancer that we didn't speak about, which is skin cancer. And what advice would you give to people about skin cancer as such?
Skin cancer is actually something we in India don't have it so commonly we don't get it. It's more common in other countries, especially Western countries. Skin cancers, basically, there are three common kinds of skin cancers. One which we call squamous carcinomas, which are aggressive, which can spread to nodes and which have to be aggressively treated. Then there is a kind which comes mostly in the face. It's called a basal cell carcinoma. If you see, more of Australians are likely to get it. Australians, Western Americans are likely to get basal cell carcinoma. That is something which is only going to be confined to this place. If you cut it out and you stitch it up, it's going to be fine. You're not going to develop it elsewhere. Then you have something called melanoma, which is like a pigmented, you have moles, pigmented moles, which you may have had it from birth, but then suddenly it starts to transform, it increases in size, it ulcerates, you have to get it checked. Melanomas are more difficult to treat.
Right.
Melanomas are problem is that except for surgery, we don't have any other treatment option. It is one of the few diseases which doesn't have a chemotherapy, an effective chemotherapy option. So we can only operate and hope that it does not spread to the next, the next level of lymph nodes and so. If it has gone to that level, then it's difficult to treat melanomas. So skin cancers, that's what these three common types, out of which basal cell carcinoma is a relatively better one to have because it is very much treatable.
Right, and
but
also
skin cancer is not something we see often.
Yeah, and is it because in India the UVA and UVB radiations are much lower, angle of incidence of the sunlight is different? Is that why that it's more in the West? And
because our exposed, we have more melanin content in our skin. We are used to this, and I think ozone protection and all that is there. Exposure is less. They and especially in Australia have very high tendency of skin cancer. It's almost like a routine thing for them. You get a basal cell carcinoma, go get it operated, and get it. But we don't have that.
We don't have that. Right, Dr. Mani. So that was the quick session that we did. We wanted to do this as an awareness session. And thank you very much for making the time. Please give a final message to the people who are watching this live, and also this will be recorded and made available. So what message would you like to give them? Because when you say that we can't really screen, we don't know whether it is there, when we know it is a problem, it still is very worrying. So what is the message that you would like to give people?
What I would like to give a message that I would like to say is, although as I said that screening is for some cancers, we have good screening options, but for most of them, we don't have screening options. But that being said, what we have made progress in is treatment. Treatment has really advanced a lot, and we are able to pick up cancers. We are able to treat cancers very well, and we are able to give good results. For breast cancer, even stage 1, stage 2, 5 years, above 95% survival is the norm here. That is what we expect. So definitely you can get cured. There was a concept that once you get cancer, it is the end of your life. At some point you're going to die early. That is not the case. If it is early stage cancer, you have the right, or you have the you have the ability to live as long as a normal person. So there is always hope. I think cancer as treatment has changed radically. There's a lot of options now, and hope is the message I would like to convey, because even if someone in your family is diagnosed with cancer, don't lose hope. There is always some treatment, and as long as there is some treatment, prognosis is still good. I think even with palliative care, we are doing very well with supporting. Now people are more aware, and we are giving good mental and physical support to cancer patients. I think cancer patients need a lot of support from family, from their medical team, and I think we are doing very well in that aspect. Hope is a message I would like to convey.
That's wonderful, because hope is what we need. Because in this time, when we've got so many other big things going wrong, having something like this, which we don't understand and we believe is a fearsome, something that we need to fear because we can't beat it, is not something that we want to have. So thank you very much, Dr. Manikandan, for your time and for that message of hope. And in case there are any follow-up questions, I'll email them to you and then I'll post them back here. Sure. But for now, thank you very much.